Hello, it's Dr. Craig Dingman from Elevate Chiropractic. Today we're going to talk about intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting is receiving a lot of information and attention in the news lately. Actually, I realized it was the top natural food or natural topic that Google recently Google searched. Anyway, so we're going to talk about intermittent fasting today. And there's a number of reasons why you might want to consider adding intermittent fasting to your nutrition protocols. Let me give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today in this short webinar. First, we're going to talk about some common myths associated with fasting. We'll talk about and discuss in a lot of detail the benefits of intermittent fasting, and then we'll learn some implementation strategies on how to actually slowly progress into fasting, because unfortunately, if you look at the first myth, people think that fasting is really all about starving yourself. And that's not true at all, and you'll find out why. Another thing I talked about, especially at the gym, people are worried about fasting because they're worried about losing muscle mass. That doesn't happen either, and we'll look at the mechanisms for that as we go through the process. People are worried that it will slow down their metabolism, and in many cases, quite the opposite is true, actually. And people are worried that it will lower their energy. And this can happen, but it tends not to. There'll be periods where your energy might be low, especially right at the beginning of a fast. But then if you persist a little, you'll actually find fasting to be energizing. It'll pick you up. That you'll be too hungry to fast. I've been a food lover my entire life, and I thought this was going to be the biggest deal for me. And I find that the beginning stages, hunger really gets me, but if I can get through the beginning of a fast, then the hunger goes away, or certainly doesn't get any worse than it does if I'm eating. So fasting is dangerous, simply not true. Humans were designed to go for long periods of time without nutrition, without food intake. Just think of our ancestors from thousands of years ago. They would go for days, weeks, without being able to catch a meal. So we certainly have mechanisms to provide adequate nutrition for our bodies without it being dangerous for prolonged periods of time. So let's address myth number one first, that it's starving people. Starvation is the involuntary abstention from eating. So it's not deliberate or controlled. And if you're starving, you have no idea when and where your next meal is coming from. So war, famine, those sorts of things, or scarcity of food. Fasting, on the other hand, is a planned, voluntary abstention from eating for spiritual health or other reasons. So I think that's a very important distinction. So if you think of it from this perspective, if you're starving, you have no control over that. If you're fasting and you get hungry, you just eat whenever you want. So really, it is a thing that you're in control of. Myth number two, that you'll lose muscle with fasting, simply not true. I was really surprised at this. I thought I'd need to keep my nutrient intake up in order to not lose muscle mass when I fasted. But this graph shows the different sources of food, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in different colors over days of fasting. And then you'll notice that the oxidation rate shows what type of fuel that you're using. So as fasting goes on, as the graph moves to the right, you can see that the carbohydrate use for fuel goes way down and protein use goes down. Yet fat use or oxidation for fuel goes way up and spikes. So clearly, the type of fuel you use when you fast changes such that you're burning more fat and you're not burning any more protein. So you're not wasting your muscles in order to liberate protein to be used. We see that clearly proteins are not being oxidized at an increased rate to provide you with energy. Just fat is. So. And that's a pretty cool benefit of fasting. I can't imagine there's anyone who's listening to this webinar who would not like to burn more of their fat for fuel and get rid of it. I know I would. Myth number three is that fasting would slow down metabolism or stop fat burning. It's not the case. Let's review physiology to understand what happens when we eat. So the first thing that happens is you'll get a spike in insulin. I think that's pretty much common knowledge, is your insulin goes up, and insulin is your storage hormone. So when there's glucose in the blood at high levels or in your stomach, your insulin levels are going to go up, and insulin is going to lock into the cells, open up the doors so that sugar can be stored inside the cells. The other thing, that's what this graphic shows anyway, but the other thing that insulin does always is it shuts down your fat burning. It's logical, right? The body senses that there's lots of carbohydrate or sugar available. So that's a readily usable energy source. Why would we take our valuable fat reserves and use them, start burning them, when we've got all this sugar ready that we can just burn up? And so if you have sugar present, your body's going to want to store it all, but it's going to use it as fuel too. You're not going to use your fat. So insulin, the hormone that you elevate by intaking food frequently, especially carbohydrate food, will shut down your fat burning. Nobody wants fat burning shut down. So in a typical North American day, we would have 4 to 6 meals per day. And every one of those meals is going to shut your fat burning down. Why? Well, because it's increasing insulin. What happens over time is the insulin receptors can effectively burn out, right? And this is kind of like coffee. You know, if you started drinking coffee and you had one small a day, you'd get that little buzz from the coffee. But sure enough, after a while, you got to move from the small up to the grande, and then from the grande to the venti, the extra large. And then one coffee's not doing it, you got to have 2. Sooner or later, you're having 2, 3, 4 cups of coffee a day to get that same feeling of waking up. Your body gets used to it. The same thing happens with insulin. If you're chronically eating, especially foods rich in carbohydrate, then your insulin levels are going to be high all the time. So the receptors on the cells that unlock that key that opens the door, they start to ignore the insulin, and then your body has to produce more and more and more insulin because of receptor burnout. So it'll become important to understand this later when we talk about type 2 diabetes. So, because there is a real misunderstanding there. Excuse me. Now let's talk about that. Type 2 diabetes. I was having an interesting conversation with a woman who is a type 2 diabetic a couple of weeks ago. And I was recommending she come to we had a workshop for intermittent fasting. I said, you know, intermittent fasting is a great way to help diabetics handle their diabetes. You can usually completely manage type 2 diabetes, 100% reversible with lifestyle changes. And intermittent fasting and what we call a ketogenic type diet, which is a high fat, very low carbohydrate diet, is a great way to manage and cure your diabetes. And this woman said, "Oh, no, you don't understand. It's not. My body doesn't make enough insulin. I don't have too much." I said, "Oh, you have type 1 then, which is you're sort of born with or develop at a very young age." She said, "No, I have what's called adult onset." And I said, "Yeah, that's type 2 diabetes." And she said, "Yeah, it's because I don't have enough insulin." And I think that's a really common misunderstanding. In type 2 diabetes, your body produces a lot of insulin. It's just that your receptors are burnt out. You experience this receptor burnout. So even though you're producing more insulin than a non-diabetic person, you still require sometimes medications or insulin injections in order to manage it because the receptors are burnt out. So even though the insulin is higher, you're not using it. Really important to understand that difference. So one of the things we want to do in type 2 diabetes is over time, reduce the amount of insulin that you're producing. I know that sounds crazy because one of the treatments is to give insulin, but you can change your physiology and repair the receptors and your sensitivity to insulin through the proper lifestyle nutrition choices. Intermittent fasting is one of the pieces of those puzzles. So let's talk about a traditional view of weight loss. Now, typically we've in the past thought that, calories in, calories out, right? So how much you eat versus how much you burn, it's simple math. There's no science to it. It doesn't matter what calories or types of foods you take in, as long as you're not taking in more calories than you're burning, you're not going to gain weight. Well, calorie does not equal a calorie. They're definitely not created equal, especially in how your body handles them. A great example is this avocado versus this bowl of Fruit Loops. If you look at the avocado, it's got about 500 calories, a large avocado, and so does this medium-sized bowl of Fruit Loops. So that the actual number of calories they bring in is the same, but I think we'd all agree that the quality of those foods is entirely different. You have virtually not a single nutrient, vitamin, mineral of any sort in the Fruit Loops. So for that whole 500 calories, you're getting nothing for your body except for a massive insulin spike. But if you look at the avocado, which is very high in healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, you get almost no insulin spike at all from intaking this fat, yet you get this good energy to fuel your body, and all the vitamins, minerals, nutrients that come with a natural food like an avocado. So I think that's a really important way to look at your foods. And one thing we do teach in our office, primary principle in nutrition that we're teaching is look at your foods with respect to their nutrient density, meaning your foods should be dense like a baseball, small and heavy and compact, or a hockey puck, as opposed to big and light and void of nutrients like a balloon, right? So carbohydrates, the Fruit Loops or bagels, breads, muffins, all the beige foods that we eat tend to be more like the balloon, full of calories, but they're empty. To provide very little in the way of nutrients for our body, but they give us lots of calories, as opposed to something like an avocado or maybe a piece of grass-fed steak, which is going to be a smaller portion, but nutrient dense, loads of healthy vitamins and minerals and nutrients in there. It's a great analogy to consider when you think of intermittent fasting is the fridge versus the freezer. So you go shopping and you buy a whole bunch of foods, and most of them, these fresh foods, you put in your fridge. And some of them you'll take down and they go into that deep freezer way back in the back room, in the basement, like in the storage, this chest freezer. You put your meats and some things down there and store them in there. And in a typical day, we are just eating what's in the fridge. So the fridge is a simple thing to get to. It's probably going to have a lot more of your convenience foods, your juice in there, and your milk, and probably your bread or something like that. But the simple foods are there in your fridge. And that would be like sugar burning, right? You have easy access to it. Your body has really very easy access to burn sugar as a fuel. So it's simple. You don't have to work very hard for it. So it's the preferred one. I don't want to go all the way downstairs into the basement. You got to find out where that light is on the chain, the string. You got to wander around the room and wave your hands till you find that light. You got to pull it on, and then you got to go to the chest freezer, and you got to reach in there. You got to rummage things around because you got 16 packs of frozen hamburgers on top of the chicken breast that you wanted. So it is difficult to get that stuff out of the freezer. But what I'm saying is that fat burning is like going to the freezer and getting out the chicken breast, and it's a bit harder to access, but you've got this tremendous amount, like you got so much food stored in your chest freezer in the basement compared to the few things that you have in your fridge. And it's like every week, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, you're shopping to put stuff in the fridge, but it might be months before you're having to restock your chest freezer in the basement. So I hope that's an analogy that helps you understand that fasting will help you access your stored fat. That's the food that's in the freezer that's hard to get to, but you've got this long-term supply. So low-calorie concept has never worked. It's never going to work, which is why I do not like the concept of diets. Really, we don't talk about dieting in our office. We talk about fueling our bodies appropriately, satisfying our body's genetic requirements for nutrition. A great example of this is most of us have probably seen The Biggest Loser, right? They had this formula with intense calorie restriction with all kinds of crazy exercise. Like they drive these people into the ground with the amount that they exercise them. And they almost always lose weight. You have to have these tremendous, like over the same show, beginning to end, these tremendous weight loss stories. But one of the things that we know is that The Biggest Loser shows never have a reunion show. And can you think of the reason why they never have a reunion show? Well, it's simply because as soon as the show finishes, these people begin to put on all the weight they lost and usually more. So there are very few long-term follow-up stories on these people because they almost always crash. And one of the reasons for that is that because of intense calorie restriction, metabolism slowed down. So our bodies are smarter than we think. If we start restricting calories, just starving ourselves, our bodies will say, hey, you know what? Not enough food's coming in. Maybe we should slow everything down. Let's adjust and reset. So if you're thinking you're just going to shift your calories and shrink your intake, and that's going to be a solution, it's not going to be a long-term solution because your body knows you and it's got a workaround in the form of slowing down your metabolism. So that when you go back, like for example, when The Biggest Loser show is over and these people go back to regular eating, not only are they eating in a healthy way, but they're eating in an unhealthy way with a metabolism that's slower than it was even before when they did gain the weight. So all the weight comes back on. So So the Biggest Loser show keeps these people just eating out of the fridge or in sugar burning mode and doesn't allow them to access the food in the freezer. Myth number 4, fasting causes low energy levels. It's not true at all, because as your insulin, if you're not intaking food a lot because you're fasting, you got these long time periods where you're fasting and not bringing in food, your insulin levels will begin to go way down. Great way for type 2 diabetics to help reset their insulin receptors. And at the same time, our adrenaline, growth hormone, your sympathetic nervous system, all these things go up. And your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. So that will increase your alertness, your concentration, because you're in this non-eating mode. From an evolutionary perspective, we're sort of on the alert, right? Evolutionary, you'd be looking for, hey, where's that prey, or where's the berry bush, or something like that. Your vision would improve, all these things, because you'd be essentially on the hunt looking for nutrients. So your energy will actually go up, right? And then there's Caveman Joe there versus the guy. Which one of these guys do you think is going to be burning more calories and more alert and energetic, right? Goes without saying. This talks about growth hormone during fasting. I thought this was really interesting. A normal day of eating will have a couple small spikes of growth hormone, but if you look at it on the right-hand graph, there's a graph of growth hormone levels with someone who's fasting. So 4 peaks and 2 significantly larger peaks than someone who's eating throughout the day. So this is pretty cool. If you think of growth hormone as well, it's just that. It helps you grow. So it helps you build muscle and repair, all those sorts of things. It is actually elevated during fasting. So myth number 5, fasting will make me too hungry. I really get this one. And this is kind of a fancy graph, but your hunger hormone is ghrelin. That's the sort of the hormone that makes you feel hunger and gives you this sensation that you need to eat. And what they've found through the research is that your ghrelin is going to peak at the times of day when you've trained it to peak based on your habits. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're going to get this peak of ghrelin, and that's going to wane after. So you can see the BLD, the breakfast, lunch, dinner, there's a spike or a peak at each of those times in the ghrelin, and then after that time passes, the ghrelin drops, and it drops whether you're eating or not. So just to clarify, that means that if you're eating regularly throughout the day, your ghrelin's going to spike at these times and make you feel hungry. And then after you eat, after these times, the ghrelin's going to go down. If you're fasting and not eating at all, your ghrelin's going to go up at around these times. And then even if you don't eat, right after these times, your ghrelin's going to drop anyway. So whether you eat or don't eat, you're going to have the same sensation of feeling hungry, and it's going to go away in exactly the same way, whether you eat or don't eat. So it's just a matter of drinking some water and waiting. Even if you're fasting, that hunger will go away as the ghrelin drops. Fasting is dangerous. Okay, it may be for some small groups, right? So people that shouldn't fast would be, say, children and adolescents. These are people who are in rapid growth rates. We don't want to slow down the growth. And, the metabolism is high. These people should probably not be considering fasting. Pregnant women, definitely not, right? You're making a baby, you need lots and a varied amount of nutrients. Women who are breastfeeding, because that, the baby certainly is taking a lot of nutrients from the mom. And people with super low body fat, less than 8%. So I don't know. I've never been one of those people. I probably never will be. So if you're less than 8% body fat, you get a pass on the intermittent fasting. Whatever you're doing is working, so just keep doing it. Okay, let's just as a little caveat, there's the big warning sign that came up. Diabetics and people on medications, fasting is a powerful solution. If you do some intermittent fasting and don't change the way you take your medications at all, you're going to crash. So you need to monitor your medications with your doctor. You need to tell them what you want to do and work with them to adjust your medications accordingly. Really, really important. Don't maverick this one, okay? You need some supervision and some help with your meds if you're a diabetic and you want to do intermittent fasting, because it will change your physiology very, very quickly and powerfully. Enough said. That's legal speak there. That's where the lawyers required me to put that slide in. There are many benefits to fasting. It helps to kickstart fast loss, reduces inflammation. So we have a chiropractic office. Most people come in and they're in pain and they want to heal from these chronic and degenerative pain conditions. One of the things that we stress with them is, hey, let's change your nutrition to reduce your inflammation. You're going to get better and feel better way faster while you're under your care. Helps reset the digestive system, which is really important. Intermittent fasting is so effective for this. Really, if you have any digestive issues at all, this will certainly be of benefit to you. Increases your concentration, as we talked about. Promotes autophagy. Autophagy is basically the process in your body where you kind of, all the old cells that maybe aren't working as well anymore that need to be broken down and repackaged and into their building blocks and used again. It's the way, that's the process. So, and you want this to happen often. You don't want old, sluggish, congested cells still trying to work. You want to break them down and replace them with new cells, and fasting will actually increase autophagy. Autophagy is a whole different conversation on its own. It's a really important part of your physiology and would probably require a whole webinar just to itself. So fasting saves money because, hey, you're not eating, and so you're not spending time preparing and cooking. So time and finances, boy, if people ever have any objections to anything I recommend, it would be time and finances. This gives you back a bit of both. Works with any eating style, paleo, vegan, gluten-free, South Beach, you name it, doesn't really matter. Just also, it needs to be mentioned that you don't necessarily need to be that guy or girl at the wedding or the party or the Christmas thing. Plan for when you're going to do your fasting. So, I would say you don't want to start intermittent fasting on December 24th, right? You want to enjoy your holiday season, but you can fast throughout the week, and then, Christmas parties come up on the weekend. You can eat what you want and then go back to fasting maybe during the week. And at the end, I'm going to give you some examples of fasting schedules that I think will show you how this is practical. Where do we get started? So understand that change is difficult, right? So you will undergo some physiological changes if you're intermittent fasting, and some of them are not actually going to feel all that great. So they'll be good for you, but they might not feel great. So this is don't shoot the messenger. This is me. I'm just telling you what to expect. But you will require a shift in your thinking and your understanding. The shift in understanding you'll get today. Certainly you can, we've got a lot more resources for this. If you want a deeper understanding, please feel free to contact our office. But you need to shift in the way you think and the way you understand how your body works and in how you view food. A lot of people view food as comfort or a crutch or a party or good times. I would say it can be all those things, but primarily food is our fuel. We really should consider that our bodies it's like a big engine, and it runs on food as our fuel. And the better we fuel it, it's going to run, right? So a gentleman came in, and I have a diesel car. And I love diesels because I drive a lot. And it's economical. I get almost 1,000 kilometers to a tank. And one of my patients, a gentleman, loves diesels too. Same reason. He loves the economy and the reliability, the durability. Diesel will go for 500, 600, 700,000 kilometers on the engine for sure. And it's cheaper. So I always put the highest octane. Like I get the super, I go to, I think it's Shell, and get the super mega clean diesel. That's all I put in. And then I have this fuel cleaner. I put an ounce in each time I fill up, and I'm just really, really neurotic about the type of fuel I put in my car because I want this car to last me, 500,000, 600,000 kilometers and not break down. And my patient has a different approach. He said, "Oh, I love a diesel. Diesel engines they're bulletproof. They're made to go on anything." He said, "So I go to this a guy who runs a restaurant, and when he's done with his cooking oil, he just runs it through this filter, and I buy it from him. It's like 15 cents a liter." He said, "So you're paying $1.15. He said, "I'm paying 15 cents a liter for this cooking oil. You can't use it in the winter because it solidifies and the engine won't run. But 6 months of the year, I put this cooking fuel in. So I not only do I get the great diesel mileage already, but I put in fuel at 15 cents a liter." And it didn't make sense to me to put here's like oil that's been used over and over and over and heated high and processed, and then it's just sort of filtered a little bit. And you're putting this in your car. I thought, oh, that's a recipe for disaster. Well, sure enough, the next time I talked to him, he had a car in to get the turbo replaced and something else replaced and something else in the motor. So clearly, we don't want to run our cars on crappy, cheap fuel. We don't want to run our bodies on crappy, cheap food, right? So anyway, food is the building blocks of you. So you are literally remade on a day-to-day basis, and your body is using the food you take as building blocks. So, if you're remaking your heart, liver, eye cells, lung cells, you name it, like if you're replacing the cells of your body, your muscles, your bones, do you want them to be made out of like Big Mac and Coke? Or do you want them to be out of organic broccoli and squash and grass-fed beef? And then the answer is so simple. But understand, every time you put something in your mouth, that food is going to be digested and used to remake you. So here's a little bit more detail, understanding the true nature of the problem. We have a few different fuel sources, and 100% of the sugar that you ingest in your foods, or the carbohydrate that's broken into fuel, that's broken into component parts for you to consume, is going to be used at fuel. So every piece of carbohydrate you take in has to be burned, is what I'm saying. Yet when you eat protein and fat, some of them are burned, but a lot of protein and a lot of fat is actually used for your biological processes. So to create muscle, to create hormones, to create cell membranes. So your protein and fat provide substrates for other parts of your body, whereas your carbohydrate is just used for fuel. It all has to be burned. Sorry, I know that was very wordy, but I hope that makes sense. So if you're not burning off your carbohydrate through activity, so if you're not earning your carbs by doing a lot of heavy gym workout and cardio and stuff, then it's all going to be stored. Your excess carbohydrate is stored in your body in what form? Well, fat, particularly around the waist, the organs, butt, and hips, all the places that we love to store fat, right? Everyone wants extra fat in those places. Okay. Insulin really is the crux of weight management. I'll say that again. If you want to control your weight, you need to be thinking in terms of insulin regulation as opposed to calorie in versus calorie out. So focus on insulin. If we can regulate our insulin and how it works, you're going to have a way better chance of controlling your body weight. Are you overstuffed? So here's an analogy for you. Imagine you're about to go on vacation and you have an empty suitcase and you've got your dresser and you're going to start packing things. Well, when the dresser is empty, when the suitcase is empty, it's quite simple to put clothes into it. You just toss stuff in, you can close the thing easily and go. But if you're one of those people who is traveling to a place where there's a varied climate, maybe it's going to be super hot some days and then super cold other days or whatever, so you need all kinds of different clothing. Well, you start to pack your suitcase, it gets full and more full and more full and more full. So it gets really, really hard to put the clothes into the suitcase. So it ends up, you got to jam it, you got to jump on top, you got to sort of, it's on your bed, you got to turn around and sit on your butt, and you're jumping up and down trying to get this stuff crammed in so you can get the thing shut. Heaven forbid the baggage carrier at the airport has got to load this one into the airplane. But this is like what the cells are like in your body. So imagine the suitcase is a cell of your body, and the clothes are sugars. And if your cell is already stuffed full of sugars, carbohydrate, because you have a hard carbohydrate diet, then it's going to be very, very difficult to get more sugar into that cell. So you require much more insulin. So instead of just tucking things in there gently, let's say you are in this analogy, the person is the insulin molecule putting the stuff into the cell. You're going to require more and more force to cram that additional sugar into an already packed cell. So that would be insulin, right? You need more and more and more insulin to get the glucose into the cell. So we need to adopt sustainable lifestyle changes and not fad diets. Fad diets don't work. Like I mentioned before, we need to make lifestyle changes. Intermittent fasting is one of the pieces of that puzzle, but it's not the only one. It's one tool. If you want to learn more about the rest of the ways to fulfill your body's genetic requirements for fuel, I would suggest you attend one of our Eat by Design workshops in our office. That's our website there, elevatechiropractic.ca. The phone number is 905-841-0400. You're welcome to attend our Eat by Design workshop, where we show you our nutritional eating plan to fulfill your genetic requirements for your body's feeding. Step 1 in intermittent fasting. So try to consolidate into 3 meals a day without snacks. Snacking is where I think our calorie intake in the day goes out the window, and also our food choices. You know, typically for snacking, it's probably not a couple carrot sticks. Might be for some people, but generally speaking, it's probably a bagel, a muffin, maybe chips or cookies, or those types of foods, right? Crackers, all the foods that are going to be basically simply carbohydrate, which equals sugar. So as step 1, try to shift yourself just to 3 squares a day with no snacks. So you'll limit the number of insulin surges, and do that for a time period till your body adapts. And then you can progress to step 2, which is where you try to eliminate your breakfast. So we call this a 16 and 8 eating schedule. So I would say eat your dinner. Let's say at 6 o'clock you finish dinner, and don't eat anything after dinner. You go to bed, you sleep, you skip breakfast, and you maybe have lunch around 11 o'clock. So let's say between you're eating lunch and dinner. So you're eating between 11 and 7. So you have an 8-hour time. That's the 8 part of the 16 and 8. So you have 8 hours in the day where you're eating, 16 hours a day where you're fasting. Try and get in that routine. You'll hate it the first day. You'll want breakfast. You want your bagel you typically have. But if you can tough it out for a couple of days, it actually becomes super simple. Right? Graphic explaining that. So step 3 would be, you might want to try and eliminate breakfast and lunch, or at least shore up the interval. So this is a 23-to-1 schedule. I actually sometimes adopt an 18 and 6 or a 20 and 4 schedule first. So meaning I'll fast for 20 hours, then eat for 4. And that 4 will be just 2 meals, like no snacks. It'll be late lunch, early dinner sort of thing. So that might mean for me, I'm eating like at 2, like between 2 and 6 I'll eat, for example, and that's lunch and dinner. Or you could progress to this eventually, which is 23 and 1. So you might eat 1 meal a day, and you might just do this once a week. So you might just have lunch one day, or just dinner, for example. You wouldn't do this, I think, probably on a repeated basis. This would be tough to do, but that might be something. And I'll show you some schedules where you could incorporate this. So there's a 23 and 1 schedule. And then start mixing it up. So you might do 16 and 8s, or 18 and 6s, 20 and 4s, 23 and 1s throughout the day. So there's lots of different permutations and combinations. You can review these later if you've kept this webinar, but Sunday you might fast breakfast. So you're doing, let's say, a 16 and 8 on Sunday. You eat lunch and dinner. But then Monday you're off to work. You got a busy day. So maybe this is when you do your 23 and 1. And then Tuesday you're back to your 16 and 8, your 18 and 6, or whatever. So that's an example, right? So this is another graphic of it. This shows a whole day of fasting, 3 whole days of fasting. So you prolonged periods. You're going to need to progress to that to let your body adapt. Don't try and jump to that right away, because you need to be able to allow your body to adapt physiologically. So these are much more advanced schedules. So when you fast, you can have as much water as you want. In the mornings, if you're skipping breakfast, for example, doing a 16 and 8, you can have some coffee and tea. Don't put sugar in it, or that kills the fast. No sweeteners either. Don't recommend use sweeteners ever. But you can use small amounts of milk or cream. Again, there's some sugars in there, so they are going to break your fast, but just a little. Bone broth also will break the fast, but only a little. So if you need something, have some bone broth. It's a healing substance, great for body repair, chock full of vitamins and micronutrients. It's excellent. Water, so add a piece of citrus or maybe some pink Himalayan salt or something like that. Those are good fasting fluids. And when you're feasting, so that when I say feasting, don't get carried away. You should avoid the tendency to overeat when you break your fast. Calories still count if you're having way too many of them. So you could have the best eating in the world, but if you're eating 6,000 calories a day and your activity rates are only allowing you to burn 3,000, you're going to gain weight. In that way, the simple math applies. Does what I eat matter when I break my fast? For sure it does. Absolutely. So your best case scenario is a very, very low carbohydrate, moderate protein, and high in healthy fat meal. Not just to break your fast, but the whole time you're feasting, like in this fast broken time, is a way healthier way to eat. So fasting is really, in the beginning, about adding good stuff, not depriving yourself. So I've had people who have unsuccessfully tried this, and all they do is cut things out. They don't add things. They just stop eating a whole bunch of foods that they normally would eat without adding in the healthy things like more proteins and especially more and more, a lot more healthy fats. And if you're not doing that, you're going to fail. So understand you've got to learn what healthy fats are and get used to using those so that you can begin to eat a lot of good, healthy fat when you're restricting your carbohydrate and when you're fasting. So some more questions about how long fasting, which schedule. Well, I would start with the basics, steps 1 to 3 that we just outlined. And then you can, once you've got the hang of fasting, you can start experimenting with different combinations throughout the week and see which ones work with your lifestyle and your weekly rhythms. And if you don't feel well, you're feeling awful and you just can't seem to focus, you're lethargic, then just break your fast. Just eat. When you feel better, try it again. Don't stress about it. Like I said before, fasting will definitely help your chiropractic experience. If you're under corrective care in the office, one of the things we need to do in order to facilitate your recovery is turn down the inflammation. Fasting would be great for that. You're less inflamed, you're in less pain, you'll have better quality of life. So here are 2 recommended resources. Dr. James Fung is a medical doctor who's an internist. He talks about intermittent fasting all the time. He was a key resource for this, and there's his handbook right there. Dr. Eric Berg has a great podcast where he's got lots of practical tips, dozens and dozens of them. I would recommend you look at Dr. Berg's podcast too. Very consumable, 2 or 3 to 5 or 6 minutes each one, and they're all just great tips. All right, so I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you listening to the Intermittent Fasting Workshop. If you have questions, I would be more than happy to respond to them. You can contact me through the contact page on our website, elevatechiropractic.ca. You can contact our office if you wanted to talk to me personally about that or have a consultation with me about any of this material. Hope it was helpful. Dr. Craig Dingman, Elevate Chiropractic. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.